What is going on, YouTube? Gabmus here, and welcome to the third episode of the Tech Pills weekly live stream. Hope everyone is doing all right. So, for the first topic of today, we're talking about a very nice new update on an interesting project we've been hearing a lot recently, and I'm talking about LibHandy, the very nice GTK library that offers the possibility to use responsive design widgets in your GTK/GNOME applications. So LibHandy has a new update, version 0.0.12, and it brings a lot of very, well, not a lot, but some pretty interesting features to GNOME apps, and it does it in a very nice way. So let me just actually cut to the actual release page. So here are the release notes in Purisms. GitLab, you can read through all of this. It's pretty technical and it doesn't really mean much to someone that's not a programmer. But what you can look at instead is the post from Alexander Mikhailenko. I think I butchered your name, but anyway, he made a blog post showing basically the big thing about the new release of LibHandy, and it's, well, swiping support on the leaflet widget. You can see a very nice animated GIF here. Let me zoom in a little bit. There you go. Oh, maybe it's too much. It's as simple as that. This is practically most of the good stuff that's in the new version of LibHandy. And you may think it's not much, but really, this is one of the things that make a very good interface. Swiping and gestures in general are one of the most natural ways of interacting with a mobile user interface. And here the blog post Alexander wrote goes about how to actually implement these swiping gesture into your existing app using the handy leaflet. And it's a pretty small blog post, but goes into enough detail to be able to actually implement this. And I'm happy to say that Feeds, the RSS/newsreader that I've been working on, actually already supports these new features. So what you're seeing here is the very latest version of Feeds. It's still not out yet. This is in the master repository, so if you're willing to install the master version, you can already try this out for yourself. But if you're not, well, maybe wait for the next release, 0.13. It will be out, I think, fairly shortly. Anyway, let me actually show you the big thing here. So let's actually change. Okay, let's actually stay to Adwaita Dark. I actually like this more. And I need to enable simulate touchscreen using the GTK debugger, but just because this gesture is only available in touchscreen devices, and it actually does make sense. Otherwise, it would be just annoying on regular desktops. So enable simulate touchscreen, and as you can see, I can just scroll by dragging as if it was a touchscreen. Pretty straightforward. And let's actually contract the view into a phone form factor and try clicking like this article here, for example. And you see the article loads. This is just old feeds as it was a while ago, and you can just go back by pressing the back button here. It just works pretty normally. But the nice thing you can do here is, you can just drag from the left edge and switch to the previous view like this. It's that simple. I know this is a very small thing, but it's actually implemented in a very natural way, and I really like how it feels, even if it if it's just simulated through a mouse, it actually feels right. It actually feels what a good swipe gesture should work like. And again, I'm happy to say that my application is actually, as far as I know, the first one to implement this new feature in LibHandy. And that's pretty much it for this news. Let's see how the chat is doing. Hello, the Lamer Linux. Hello, Eric. Good to see you all. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. Anyway, I think we can move on to the next topic, and we're still swimming in GNOME waters for this next post. And the big news is that GNOME 3.36 will probably bring better dual GPU support with NVIDIA on Linux. And we're specifically talking here about NVIDIA Optimus. So the whole story about NVIDIA Optimus is a fairly old one at this point, as far as Linux support. There have been multiple attempts at trying to get as good an experience as possible with NVIDIA Optimus on Linux, but it didn't always work right, mostly because NVIDIA likes to do things their own wrong way, and Linux users in particular tend to suffer because of this quite a lot. Many features we actually you see in modern NVIDIA GPUs, most of the time they're not really 100% working or supported in Linux. And well, I mean, dual GPU is one of them. And apparently the GNOME guys are working on a new tool. Well, that's not a new tool. It's an extension to their old the old tool that they're already using since 2016 to switch between graphics card, and I think that only works with graphics cards that are supported by the open drivers, so Intel and AMD. But anyway, apparently they're working on implementing the support for the NVIDIA proprietary driver into this piece of software that's called Switcheroo Control. And this would potentially allow the GNOME desktop to be able to just launch applications on the discrete GPU just by right-clicking and clicking on Launch on discrete GPU. This is a very, well, it should work this way already, but of course, since NVIDIA, again, I don't like NVIDIA. I've been their customer for a long time, and I've always had problems with their products, with their technologies. And since recently, since Polaris AMD graphics cards are actually viable, I replaced my NVIDIA GPU with an RX 5700 XT, and since then I've been able to actually experience what it's like to use a proper integrated GPU that works with the kernel and not against it. Anyway, I digress. Having this functionality would probably bring more polish to the overall user experience on most of the Linux desktop, really. NVIDIA Optimus, while not perfect, it's still a very popular technology, particularly in gaming laptops, because having the power-hungry NVIDIA GPU turned on all the time just doesn't make sense on a laptop, where you still want to be able to have at least a couple of hours of battery use. And having this support integrated into the desktop environment and using an actual not third party but detached API makes it possible that other desktop environments like KDE, or maybe even external tools like maybe just a standalone applet thing, can implement the Switcheroo Control API to be able to bring actual good support and proper support for the NVIDIA proprietary driver with NVIDIA Optimus on Linux. And that's something I'm really excited about. Even if I will not be an NVIDIA customer again anytime soon, this will probably be for the better of the whole Linux desktop ecosystem. Let's actually see what the chat's talking about. So, Eric Adams says the 435 and 440 drivers have been pretty great on my Dell. You know what? My girlfriend, who actually has the Star Labs Laptop Mark, Laptop Pro, the one with the discrete GPU. I made a review of that on my channel. She's using that PC as her main laptop right now, and since she upgraded from whatever version she was running to the 435 driver, she started having issues with the solution she was previously using, which is NVIDIA X-Run. And well, again, since she upgraded the driver, she just couldn't use NVIDIA X-Run anymore. But fortunately, we were able to actually get around it by using Optimus Manager, which I hadn't previously tried, and it's actually a pretty good piece of software. But anyway, I think that NVIDIA support is still pretty much, it's not completely 100% there yet. I mean, it's spotty at best, and it could work a lot better. And at the end of the day, if I consider myself kind of an expert, well, if not an expert, a power user, and if I have difficulties using the NVIDIA drivers, I can just imagine that the average user is just not going to bother. The Layman Linux says, I'm glad I'm done with NVIDIA Optimus, but I love to see some improvement. Exactly, share the same sentiment here. Even if we don't want to use proprietary, and frankly, out of standard means stupid in my book. If we don't want to use stupid technology, it doesn't mean that improvements don't influence us, because we're Linux desktop users, and still the majority of people having high-end PCs are rocking NVIDIA GPUs, and that means that having better NVIDIA GPU support on Linux is overall better for the whole ecosystem. Hello, Mikhail S. Glad you're here. And we're still talking about Optimus and how it only worked on Ubuntu. Actually, Optimus works pretty well on Arch if you know what you're doing, but that's always the thing with Arch. I mean, you have to know what you're doing, and sometimes you have to jump through hoops, and I get that that's not something everyone wants to do. Of course, with an AMD GPU, even using something like Arch is a lot easier. You don't have to jump through any hoops to get your GPU working, and that's, well, 90% of the problems you have on a desktop. Fedora does a pretty good job too, says Eric, but yeah, Ubuntu does the best job that I've seen. I just set Prime Select on demand and it just works. Really? I've never tried that. I knew it existed, but I was always kind of skeptical towards it. I'd love to see some benchmarks on that. NVIDIA did say that they were going to open some of their drivers to the Linux kernel like AMD, but they said some, not all. Yeah, we actually talked about that last week, if you remember, and I'm gonna share again my thoughts on this supposed news. I don't think we're gonna see much at all with this announcement. I don't know. I just don't have much faith in NVIDIA. They can still prove themselves worthy, but again, I don't know. So let's actually move to the next topic. So we're switching gears. We're talking about NVIDIA, and now we're talking about AMD. In particular, we're talking about AMD releasing their new GPU, the 5500 XT. And this is a mid-range GPU, and it's priced just around $170 US, which is a very interesting market to be in right now, because according to, well, most statistics, including Steam surveys, most people are still using 1080p 60 monitors. And that means that this market of about $200 GPUs is pretty much the main target for your everyday gamer. Anyway, AMD announced two models that are, well, identical to one another, like one-to-one identical, except for the VRAM. One model has 8 gigs of VRAM, and the other model has just 4. And they're in about a $30 difference, something like that, because the 8 GB model should cost around $200, but that's still MSRP, and we all know that MSRP doesn't really always one-to-one match the actual retail price. Also considering board partners, cards that usually tend to cost a little bit more, we're probably gonna see something around $200-ish for even for the 4 GB model. But if it stays at MSRP at 170, I think that's a very hard price to beat for the performance that you're getting from this thing. It's practically it brings a very good 1080p 60 experience without breaking the bank, and that's the whole rationale about it, because it's basically on par with the RX 580 of the Polaris GPU from, well, long time ago at this point, but with a well, first of all, a smaller price tag, because the 580 still costs around $200, something like that, and the 5500 XT costs just $170, and it's a newer GPU, and of course that means that power consumption is also greatly improved. Power consumption and power management are a lot better on this newer GPU, on this new Navi architecture. So there's that. And just a quick note I want to make: according to most benchmarks that I've seen, including Gamers Nexus's, the 8 GB variant of this card isn't that much faster than the 4 GB variant, and in most cases it's actually on par, if not in margin of error within each other. They're in margin of error within each other as far as frames per second go. I think that's because the actual hardware, the actual core of the GPU is just so powerful, and having just more VRAM for a 1080p target doesn't really do much at all. So I think that I just think that if you were thinking about buying a 5500 XT, you probably should stick with the 4 GB variant. And if not, you can probably, if you just need like to go 1440p, or, well, 4K isn't really viable at this point with anything, even the most high-end stuff. 4K is still kind of finicky. But if you maybe want to go 1440p, maybe higher than 60 FPS, I think you're better off going with something like the 5700 or the 5700 XT. And the nice thing about being in AMD GPUs is, again, that Linux support is top notch, and the drivers are actually included in the kernel, and the actual development is done upstream inside of Mesa. And we've been able to see great things like the Radeon ACO compiler from Valve, probably just because the AMD graphics stack is open source. And if it wasn't, I don't think we would have seen anything like that. All right, next topic for today. And we're talking about Google. And no, we're not talking about Stadia. I don't want to talk about that stupid thing. But we're talking about, well, actually the Google Core Services. The ability to be able to log into the Google services, including Gmail, YouTube, and you have it, Google services in general. And apparently people are reporting that they're not able to log in their Google account inside of some Linux browsers, reportedly Falcon and Conqueror. So apparently, and Michael, if you're listening, just take this as a lesson. Apparently, Google hates KDE. What about that? Of course, I'm kidding. I mean, this is probably some weird market tactic from Google, and I'm not really too surprised by it, to be honest. Um, my rationale is that they are trying to bring some users back to Chrome by doing this, by actually forcing people to their browser to be able to use their services. And they're actually telling users that, well, the browsers they're trying to use are insecure. Yeah, the actual message is, let me actually show you the article from bleepingcomputer.com. There you go. I don't know if you can read it, but the message on the arrow says, this browser or app may not be secure. Try using a different browser. If you're already using a supported browser, you can refresh your screen and try again to sign in. I don't buy it. There's no way I can buy it. This is Falcon, the newest KDE browser out there, and the nice thing about Falcon is that it's based on the Qt web engine, which in turn is based on Blink/Chromium. So what they're saying is that Chromium, their own browser, the same foundation they're using to build Chrome, isn't secure. And instead, you should be using Chrome. Again, I have no reason to believe that this is actually a real thing. I don't think that Falcon is insecure. Maybe Conqueror. I don't think that it's inherently insecure, but it's a very old browser at this point. And last time I checked, it was still lagging back with most of the newer web standards. So maybe Conqueror, but still not sure. But Falcon, definitely not. Definitely Falcon is a modern and well-supported browser. If nothing else, because it's practically a Qt wrapper around Chromium. It doesn't make sense that it would be insecure or out of date or unsupported for that reason. And honestly, if Google needs to use these kind of tactics to bring users back to Chrome, I think they're just gonna lose more users in all of their product range. I just want to use my browser. If I'm comfortable using KDE, I'm just hypothesizing here. If I'm comfortable using KDE, which I'm not, but Michael is, so if Michael wants to sign into their Google account, he should be able to. The only thing I wonder about this is, what if you spoof your user agent? What if you tell Google you're actually using Google Chrome? Is it something that goes even deeper? Or is it just a, well, user agent check like most other browser checks? I don't know. The article didn't report anything about testing with changing the user agent or anything like that. So maybe if you're having this problem, just try downloading a user agent changer extension and see if that solves anything. I'm just curious at this point. This is a pretty weird story, to be honest, and a pretty bad move on Google's part. The Layman Linux says, I'm sticking with my Brave. We know there will be ways around it. And Eric says, reminds me of sites that claim to not support Firefox. Yeah, okay, so let's talk about Brave for a second. I don't like Brave because I don't understand their business model. I don't like the blockchain gibberish talk that they're doing because it just sounds like, I don't know, marketing speech. And honestly, I don't buy that they're really that private. I don't know. I've never liked Brave myself. I've looked into it. I've tried it a couple of times in the past, but I always felt something. I always felt something wrong with it. I don't know. I don't know what to say. I just have this gut feeling that Brave isn't really what it's advertised to be. But if it works for you at the end of the day, it's still an option as long as it doesn't steal your data. And about websites not supporting Firefox, we're really back to the old days of Internet Explorer. If you're old enough to remember when websites had the obnoxious banners and warnings that, well, this website is optimized to work with Internet Explorer. If you're not using Internet Explorer, it's not going to work, and yada yada yada. And the reality is not okay. The thing is that those people building those websites, it's not that Firefox isn't compatible. It's just that their websites are so bad that they don't work with Firefox, or they just don't want to find out. The FernoS Dev joins the chat room. Hey, happy you're here. Anyway, what were we talking about? Yeah, it just means that you don't want to do the work to make your website work right on another browser. This is not the same thing in with this Google thing here. We're not talking about that thing. We're not talking about compatibility. We're talking about alleged compatibility, but it's really masking these. Well, they just want you to use Chrome, and they're masking it with a supposed compatibility problem. But we all know there's no compatibility issue there. But websites that don't work with Firefox, well, sometimes you can get around those using user agent spoofing, but that doesn't work 100% of the time, because there are actually websites that plain don't work with Firefox. Even if you change your user agent and try to use the website, I think the last one I tried was Skype in the web browser, because from time to time, because of various reasons, I find myself to have to use Skype, but I don't actually use it in my day-to-day life. It's very rare that I have to, but when it happens, I have to use a Chromium window, and I actually use ungoogled Chromium, which is, well, what it sounds like. It's just Chromium without all the Google stuff. And honestly, I've been using it from time to time as more of an appliance than a browser. It's just more like a compatibility tool to run some web apps that I need to run, and not having the Google bits doing their spy magic in the background is just, well, it's an added bonus, and it's not like I'm using it as my day-to-day browser anyway. So, and yeah, so the compatibility with Firefox, it's not the thing is not about Firefox. It's about website builders that don't actually respect the web standards, that don't actually want to test their websites to work with other browsers, and that's just lazy in my opinion. Lamo Linux says, I'm a browser hopper. I hop from Brave to Firefox to Chromium and back to the chain. Only Google software I use is Google Calendar and Google Task. I need to take some time to learn Nextcloud. Okay, so there are two things here. Browser hopper, that's a new one to me. But anyway, whatever works for you. I just, since Firefox Quantum, I just liked it so much that I really didn't feel the need to go back to Chromium. And honestly, after a while that I've been using Firefox, I've always checked back on Chromium from time to time, and it got considerably worse with time. I don't know what's up with that, but I think they're just throwing everything into that browser, like everything in the kitchen sink, and it's just becoming, I don't know, like Emacs, an operating system of its own. I don't know. So you need some time to learn Nextcloud. Okay, as a Nextcloud user myself, I can tell you there's not much to learn really. If you can administer well, that's not the word I'm looking for. If you can admin an Ubuntu server, you're probably good to go to use Nextcloud. Honestly, it's that simple. You just, if you have a, I don't know, I don't really suggest you use a VPS, because Nextcloud is very useful, and at least if you're anything like me, you tend to throw everything into that Nextcloud folder just because you want it synced. And I think you're better off using an actual hardware server thing. Even a Raspberry Pi with like an external USB hard drive is pretty good. And you just do snap install Nextcloud, and that's all you have to do. It just works. It's pre-configured with everything you need. It even pulls the it even gets you like a Let's Encrypt certificate, which is pretty nice in my opinion. And it uses the most effective optimizations to Nextcloud, and it's basically a ready to go package. It's the easiest server-side application I've installed thanks to Snap. And you know my opinion on Snap if you watched my previous video. And I really don't like Snap on the desktop, but again, I love it on the server, and really it does make a lot of sense there. So if you're willing to try Nextcloud, just maybe try it in a VM or in a VPS. But if you're serious about it, just get yourself an old machine to use as a server and throw it in there. It's really great. It's a game changer. I can tell you from personal experience. So you said the Lemon Linux says, I stole that say browser hopper from a Windows and Linux YouTuber named Total OS today. That's not the first time I've heard of him. Him or her. I don't remember if it's a guy or gal. Anyway, I should check the channel out sometimes. I got a full-time job that works on even. I got a full-time job that works on even and a full-time college student. Lol. Yeah, I'm. You're a college student too. Yeah, I know college/uni. It's pretty time consuming, and working alongside that, I don't know how you manage. Anyway, the FernoS dev saying, to be honest, Firefox would be near perfect if they put some more care into the GUI design on Linux, especially the CSD implementation. I totally agree on that. I actually really enjoyed, I really like to see that they actually did implement some form of CSD in Firefox. And if you don't know what CSD is, it basically means client-side decoration. It means that the application you're using doesn't have any border, and the actual window controls are built into the toolbar. That's what GNOME uses. And seeing Firefox use CSD, even if the implementation is a little bit, it's not perfect, but it was still a pretty big thing to me. And seeing that they're not really improving it too much, it's pretty sad. I think that these days Chromium does a better job of implementing CSD on Linux, and that's pretty sad. I think that Firefox could do better. But anyway, again, the FernoS dev, just they do a smashing job with client-side decoration on Windows and macOS, but on Linux, yikes. Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know what's the thing with that. It just seems that these open source projects are still more oriented towards supporting the proprietary options first, which is again kind of sad. That's why I really like smaller projects like Falcon and Epiphany, because they're actually working just for the desktop environment. I mean, Falcon is built for the KDE desktop, and Epiphany is built for the GNOME desktop. And even if they're not like, Falcon is pretty good. Epiphany, it's usable. I wouldn't say it's more than usable, but I think that the work that they're doing is really great, because they're actually trying to get a proper browser that properly integrates into the desktop that you're using. And that's actually, I think that's, what can I say? How can I say it? That's admirable. Just say it that way. The Lemon Linux says, I got an old T430 ThinkPad I don't use anymore, so thinking maybe making it a Nextcloud server. Totally. Well, I mean, a T430 is a very nice machine. I would refrain from retiring it and using it as a server, but if that's the only machine you have around, it's totally gonna work. It's a nice machine, and I would probably really like to play around with it myself, but using it as a server, well, if you already have a primary machine, if it's really just collecting dust as of right now, using it as a server is a great option. Make that 2 college students in chat. UK version of college here. Oh, you're a college student too? So we're 3 here. Nice. The Lemon Linux again. Install Ubuntu server on it and install Nextcloud as a snap. Yep, that's the way to go. Again, the Ferno staff, not going to lie, client-side decorations is one of the reasons I prefer Chromium-based to Firefox currently. Chromium has a beautiful implementation that adapts really well to anything. Agree. I actually agree to that. I stopped caring about themes a while ago, and I'm on Adwaita Dark right now. So I haven't been suffering that so much on Firefox, but I know what you're talking about. The Chromium implementation of CSD, again, it's just better. I got 2 years of community college, and then I'm going to another 2 years for a university college. I don't get that difference. So at some point, someone has to explain me the difference between college and university in the US, because in Europe we have university. That's it. Well, mostly. Alright, maybe my opinion is slightly invalid here because I main Vivaldi, which is an HTML based GUI, but still, Vivaldi is proprietary, my friend. I think Vivaldi is proprietary. Yes, it has a EULA. I think it's proprietary. I'm pretty confident. It has a privacy policy. It collects data. It allows third party to collect data. Oh well. I don't like Vivaldi because it's not open. It's not privacy focused. It's money focused. Oh, that's okay. It's just not really my jam. Anyway, I think we can move on to the next topic. And we're talking about proprietary stuff, right? This ties into it pretty well. Windows 7 ending support in January. Well, this doesn't really touch any of us directly because, well, if you're here, I don't think you're using Windows. And if you are, what are you doing here? Just install Linux. Anyway, jokes aside, this is pretty bad for many people out there. You see, Linux awareness is not, well, people are not aware that they have a choice as far as the operating system goes. For them, this is just Windows and probably Mac, and most of the time they call Mac OS iOS, which is pretty cringy. But anyway, what's happening here? People are throwing away their computers, and let me stress on that. People are throwing away their computers to buy new ones because Windows 7 support ended. Let that sink in. People don't know that Linux is an option. People don't usually have money to spend on personal computers anymore. It's not a priority. We're geeks. We like computers. We like to build custom desktops, maybe, and we like premium laptops and stuff like that. We like this kind of stuff. That's why we actually are willing to spend money on the next big hardware thing. Okay? But people usually don't care. People just don't care. People just want to use their Office suite and check their email and whatever they do on computers these days. And they don't know that Linux is an option, because if they knew, they wouldn't spend so much money to get a new appliance computer, because that's what they're using it for at the end of the day. But the fun thing is that I've come to the conclusion that even if they do know, because they're told, not because they're actually interested, but if they're told that there's a third option besides Windows or Mac OS, I mean, but if there's another option other than throwing away their current computer and buying a new one, they just end up not caring. I've come to this conclusion recently because they don't know what Linux is. Maybe they've heard of it. Maybe they know it's some hackery thing and they know that they're not good with computers, so it's probably not for them and they'd rather stick with Windows. All these years, all this time, and it's still the same narrative. It's still the same old narrative that Linux is difficult, that Linux is complicated, and all that kind of stuff. We all know it very well. Honestly, it's frustrating. Apart from the frustration of seeing actual good working hardware being thrown away, seeing people spending their hard-earned money on computers that they don't need just because they're told that their computer is too old, when probably, depending on what they're doing with it, it's not. It's nerve-wracking. And I don't know if the fault's on us or on them, because it's true that people usually don't like change. And most people out there, they try to avoid change as much as possible. Even in the Linux community, when GNOME 3 came out, it wasn't great, okay? But when it came out, no one liked it because they wanted GNOME 2. They didn't see, well, most of the people didn't see the potential in GNOME 3, didn't see what it could become. And in 2019, GNOME 3 is, again, the default de facto standard desktop in most Linux distributions out there, including but not limited to the most business-oriented ones like RHEL, CentOS, Ubuntu. I'm pretty sure SUSE uses GNOME by default as well. And that's change for you. And change is always something that scares us. And normal people, so to speak, as well as geeks, we're all afraid of change. And I think that's something we should change. I think that change is innovation. I don't think that change is necessarily disruption. It is in a way, because if something like, I don't know, say you have a server and suddenly you update your web server, like say it's Nginx, and all your config files are not valid anymore and you have to rebuild them. That's a huge pain, but that's not the kind of change I'm talking about. For those kind of things, there are LTSs and extended support, and at some point people will migrate to the new standard. So what the kind of change I'm talking about here is things are still there, but they're laid out differently. Things are still there, doable, but they just work in a different way. This kind of change, we're all scared of it. I personally, maybe I'm one of those few people, I think, that doesn't hate change that much. I'm still not completely immune to this. One big change that I made a while ago was changing the switches in my mechanical keyboard. I was using clicky switches. I'm now using linear switches, and I was scared that linear switches weren't just for me. I would have just wasted money, and turns out I really like linear switches. It's just like, it's a dumb example because it's really a dumb thing. It's a very subtle thing, and maybe not everyone could appreciate it, but it's just an example. But if you take your time to actually try and jump the gap of change, it can make your life better. And this It's still true for both this discussion here about Windows users, Windows 7 users that just don't care for any other option because they don't know it and don't want to learn something different, and just want to use Windows because that's what they know. And it's the same thing for us Linux users. I think that innovation is something that we should really look forward to, and we should really try to understand the value of innovation, because with innovation there's, I mean, innovation makes things better. Innovation, like in the kernel, may improve performance. Innovation in user interface may improve usability, or the speed at which you do tasks, or even accessibility. I recently used Mate a lot. In my university lab computers, they have Fedora with Mate, and I've been using it a lot, and I've been realizing that I don't really like it, because I'm very used to the I'm used to the new GNOME 3 workflow, and getting back to the old GNOME 2 days. And I've used Linux back in the GNOME 2 days. I just don't. I just feel like it's 2 steps backwards, if you know what I mean. It's still my opinion. I'm not saying that I'm right necessarily about this, but just wanted to talk about change, and in particular this thing about Windows 7. I think I digressed too much because what I wanted to say was originally that I think if we want to see the Linux desktop going further, we just need to advocate more to the end users. But at the same time, when someone like me, that I'm just a student, I'm just a nobody for most people. If I go out there and advocate for the Linux desktop, it doesn't really make that much of an impression, because I'm a nobody. They probably know how to use Windows from school, or from a course that they've taken. Maybe even some course sponsored by Microsoft. I know that they do these things from time to time, and they suppose that, well, professionals just know better. And I think what would really help here, improving awareness of Linux, and spreading knowledge about it as far as the desktop goes, a good way to do that would be having some actual hardware companies involved into spreading this knowledge. I can see some company like System 76, or Purism maybe, or I don't know, Tuxedo Computers, just to name one in Europe. They could just, maybe they do, and I just don't know about it, but they could just like make courses about Linux, about computers, and maybe they could even get some sales out of them. Maybe they can sell computers in schools this way. Who knows? I think it's I just like had this idea. I think it's worth exploring it, because I think that would really make a change. And again, the real problem here is that no one can talk as much as he wants, but when a company actually sends reps to talk about something, they just inherently have more authority. Anyway, let's check back in with the chat, and they're trying to explain the college system in the US. I will read that later, probably. I think it's kind of off topic right now. So the Lemon Linux says about Windows. When Windows 7 came out, people, I'm staying on Windows 7. I hate change. Windows 7 close to end of support. People with change, throws their computer away, and use Windows 10. Yeah, that's that's just, I don't know. It just doesn't work. I guess I guess we're just so into this stuff that we cannot see any differently. But maybe from the eyes of another person, this just works for them. I don't know. For an OS dev, I honestly can't wait for Linux to start being advertised for what it is, a replacement to Windows and macOS that works, and sadly for Windows 10 to drop in market share a bunch. That's a great dream, and I hope it comes true at some point, but uh, it's been a lot of time, and it's a difficult thing to do. Uh, the Lemon Linux, I used to hate GNOME 3, but now I use GNOME 3 and I love it, and I recommend it to college students if they don't care if it's different. Plus, if you use Google services, GNOME works best on it. Well, the thing about Google services, they have some integration, but it's still using the API. One thing that I can tell you is I've been using Evolution a lot, like a lot, because it's a great piece of software for managing email and calendars, and for uni in particular, for university, it's just pretty great. And what I've noticed is that if I start using Evolution a lot during a month, at some point it just refuses to connect to the Google servers. I think that's because it exceeded the quota for the actual API, and it just doesn't work for me. I liked better when email used just classic standard IMAP and SMTP, and I actually have a couple of emails that use those instead of APIs. But anyway, yeah, I mean, GNOME has some integration with Google as well as other online accounts, but it's not like it works best on GNOME. At least in my opinion, it just happens to work, and I think it would work practically the same in KDE. The only maybe interesting thing that they have is GVFS file systems. So you can basically mount your Google Drive as if it was an external hard drive. That's pretty handy. Still, I don't really like to use like remote cloud services like that. Even my Nextcloud, I could mount my Nextcloud as a GVFS file system. I don't usually do that. I just use the good old syncing client and just go with that. And well, this way I also have 3, maybe 4 backups of my things in different machines, one on the server, one on the desktop, and one on the laptop, which makes things kind of better. But anyway, if I guess that if it's there, this is your thing. If you like mounting cloud drives instead of actually syncing them, yeah, this is a pretty great option. And let's move on. Eric Adams says, I personally think GNOME 3 as the default is as much political as anything else. It's certainly not based on technical merit, and this comes from a GNOME user. Well, there's some truth there, because GNOME is deeply integrated into the whole Red Hat ecosystem. And besides, I think that GTK is, for the most part, the de facto standard for Linux toolkits out there. I mean, the biggest applications in Linux use GTK, including Firefox and Chromium. Well, Chromium doesn't really use GTK, but it interacts with GTK to do theming and all that kind of stuff. And as well as LibreOffice, and trying to come up with other examples. But I guess things are changing now. New apps like Telegram, OBS, you're using Qt instead. Well, GIMP is another one that uses GTK. But I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. At least I'm getting down the rabbit hole with this thing about toolkits, because people tend to fanboy on toolkits, and it's just something that I don't get. As a developer, I understand liking one or the other, but as a user, I don't really get it. As a developer, I really like using GTK, and while I understand the technical merits of Qt, I just don't like the way it works. But I understand that if I wanted to make some more, like some bigger project, some more, I don't know, custom interface, something really involved like Telegram or OBS, I'd probably be better off using Qt. But I digress. Lemon Linux, I can see either Ubuntu or Manjaro become advertisement. I didn't really get that. Okay, let's just skip that. Fairness that regarding GNOME 3, I honestly think unless it's customized, it's going to deter most users and developers because most features they'd expect won't be there. Desktop icons, system tray icons, etc. Yeah, that's something I can agree on. But again, with extensions and custom sessions, and the different, well, they're not really different. One thing needs the other. Ubuntu, the Ubuntu session that has some extensions loaded by default, it's a custom GNOME session, and I think that just works. I mean, for what I understand, GNOME is just, well, the plain shell, and you can use extensions and preload them depending on the kind of user experience you're trying to offer to actually package a different desktop experience. I could have like 3 or 4 GNOME sessions with different layouts, one maybe stock, one with the dock and panel layout, and one with the taskbar layout, maybe. Just making an example here. And you could include as many extensions as you wanted, and you can just freeze the version of GNOME that you're using and just update when you're sure that there are no more bugs. If it wasn't for some of the feature removals in there, GNOME 3 is a decent alternative for newcomers who are willing to learn it. Again, depending on what kind of experience you're offering, I think Ubuntu offers a pretty good default experience with GNOME, and they have all the time to either decide that they can just stick with that, and well, that's gonna work in my opinion, or maybe they can explore the underlying shell and start looking into different extensions and disabling the extensions that they're already using, and going down that rabbit hole. It's something that they can do, but it's not like they have to. At least I think that it doesn't really matter if you use something like the default stock Ubuntu customization on top of GNOME. I think that's a pretty solid desktop overall. And I think that's pretty much all for the chat. And we're practically already there with time, so I think we're gonna wrap it up here, guys. What do you think? So guys, I really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Tech Pills weekly live. I still have to get my head around the name. So let's do this all over. What do you think? So guys, this is gonna wrap it up for this weekly live stream. I thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there. Remember to subscribe to my channel if you want more of this. Join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community. You see there are QR codes overlaying, so if you want to join the Telegram community or Discord server, you can just do that by using the QR code. And make sure to tune in next week, next Saturday, same time, so 5 p.m. Central European, and that's 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central, and 8 a.m. Pacific next Saturday for the next episode of the Tech Pills weekly live stream. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week. Bye.